The Hummingbird's secret. The palace gardens were alive with the renewal of spring, yet to Princess Elara, it felt as if the season existed solely for the arrival of one tiny creature. Each year, like clockwork, the emerald hummingbird appeared. Its feathers gleamed with hues that shifted with the light. Sometimes the green of deep forests, other times as iridescent as sunlight on water. The bird's wings beat with an elegance that defied its frantic speed, producing a soft, thrumming sound that seemed to hum with secrets. For most, the bird was simply a seasonal marvel, a fleeting delight as it flitted from blossom to blossom. But to Elara, it was something more. She had watched it closely since childhood, sensing a purpose behind its movements. While her attendants dismissed her curiosity as fanciful, Elara couldn't ignore the way it seemed to linger near her, hovering just long enough to feel as if it were trying to tell her something. This spring, however, the bird's arrival felt different. Its entrance into the garden came not with the aimless zigzagging of a creature searching for nectar, but with a deliberate grace. It perched on the low branch of a jasmine tree and tilted its head toward her, its dark eyes glinting with an almost human intelligence. Elara sat frozen on the marble bench near the fountain, her book forgotten in her lap. The bird's gaze seemed to bore into her, its thrumming wings creating a sound that wasn't just noise but a rhythm, a pattern she couldn't place but instinctively recognized. Slowly she rose, her footsteps muffled by the soft moss underfoot. The bird did not flee. Instead, it fluttered to another branch, closer this time, as if beckoning her forward. Elara followed. The palace garden stretched far and wide, a labyrinth of fragrant hedges, trellised vines, and hidden alcoves. She had wandered them since she was old enough to walk, yet the bird led her down paths she hadn't noticed before. The air seemed to change as she ventured deeper, cooler, tinged with an earthy musk that carried a faint floral sweetness. The sunlight, once warm and golden, grew softer, filtered through the thick canopy above. It wasn't until the bird paused again, perching on a low stone wall overgrown with moss, that Elara realized where she stood. The place was a hidden corner of the gardens, forgotten by all except time itself. Here, the air was heavy with stillness, and the hum of the bird's wings echoed louder, as though the stones themselves were listening. In the center of this secluded space stood a pedestal, half concealed by ivy and age. It was unlike anything else in the gardens, made of a stone darker than any she had seen. Its surface was carved with intricate runes that seemed to shimmer faintly, though there was no light to catch. Elara's breath hitched. She felt as though she had stumbled into a place not meant for her, or for anyone. The hummingbird hovered above the pedestal, its wings slowing until they almost stilled, revealing its delicate frame. Elara approached cautiously, her pulse quickening. The runes seemed alive, their glow pulsing in time with the bird's movements. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface of the stone. The moment her skin touched it, a soft vibration rippled through her hand, up her arm, and into her chest. It wasn't unpleasant. Rather, it felt as though something ancient and vast had stirred, yawning awake after a long slumber. The hummingbird let out a sharp chirp, and the vibration stopped. "Elara," a voice murmured. She spun around, but the garden was empty. The voice had been faint, almost like a whisper carried on the breeze. Yet it had been unmistakable, soft, lilting, and entirely unfamiliar. "Elara," it said again, clearer this time. Her eyes darted back to the pedestal, her heart pounding. The runes glowed brighter now, their light dancing across her face. The hummingbird flitted down to rest on the edge of the pedestal, tilting its head as though it were watching her. "What is this place?" Elara whispered, her voice trembling. The hummingbird chirped once and took flight, its wings creating that now familiar hum. But this time the hum carried a melody, a faint, otherworldly tune that filled the air like the first notes of a long-forgotten song. As Elara stood there, the weight of the garden's silence pressing against her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just unlocked a door to something far greater than herself. For days after her discovery, the pedestal haunted Princess Elara's thoughts. The vision of its glowing runes, the pulse of energy she had felt, and the soft whisper of her name all replayed in her mind, a riddle without answers. Even in the mundane routines of palace life, her thoughts drifted to the secluded glade, its quiet mystery gnawing at the edges of her reality. The hummingbird, too, was no longer just an enchanting visitor. Each morning it arrived at the gardens, as if waiting for her. It no longer danced aimlessly among the blossoms, but followed her movements, darting between her and the hidden paths, as though beckoning her to return. By the fourth day, she could resist no longer. Under the veil of twilight, Elara slipped out of the palace. The corridors were silent, the torches casting flickering shadows as she hurried to the gardens. There, the bird awaited her, perched on a wrought iron arch entwined with ivy, its eyes gleaming like black diamonds in the dim light. The creature took flight, tracing a deliberate path through the gardens. This time, the air seemed even more charged with anticipation. The hedges loomed taller, the flowers' colours richer under the moonlight. The very world seemed to hold its breath. When she reached the glade, the pedestal was glowing faintly, its runes alive with a soft, pulsing light. The hummingbird hovered above it, its tiny form shimmering as if caught between two worlds. Elara approached slowly, her footsteps muffled by the mossy ground. "Why have you brought me here?" she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the bird's wings. The moment the question left her lips, the pedestal's light flared, casting the glade in a silvery glow. A soft wind rustled through the trees, though the air had been still moments before. And then, as if carried on that unseen breeze, a voice emerged, gentle, musical, and ancient. "You hear us," it said. Elara froze. It was the same voice she had heard before, but now it was clearer, resonating in the very air around her. "Who are you?" she asked, her heart pounding. "We are the Luminara," the voice replied. And as it spoke, faint shapes began to form in the light. They were translucent figures, barely more than shadows of light, their forms flickering like candles in the wind. "We are the keepers of light and melody, the guardians of harmony between your world and ours." Elara's breath caught as the figures grew clearer. They were unlike anything she had seen. Tall and elegant, their features ethereal and shifting, their movements fluid as if made of water and air. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You are the descendant of a sacred promise," the voice said, the shapes now circling her in a gentle, almost reverent dance. "Long ago, your ancestors forged a bond with us, one that brought balance and peace to both our realms. But that bond has been forgotten, and with it, our light begins to fade." Elara shook her head, trying to make sense of the words. "I don't understand. What bond? Why me?" The hummingbird let out a soft trill, and one of the Luminara reached toward her, their hand made of shimmering light. "You bear the mark of the promise," it said, gesturing toward the pedestal. Elara glanced down and saw the faint glow of the runes reflected in her skin. A wave of understanding washed over her, a connection, ancient and unbroken, yet fragile. "The hummingbird," she whispered. "It's not just a bird, is it? It is our messenger, a sentinel between worlds," the Luminara replied. "It has watched over the bond, waiting for the one who could restore it." Elara's mind raced, the alliance they spoke of, the fading light. It sounded like more than just a legend. If what they said was true, then her kingdom's very existence might be tied to this forgotten promise. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice steadier now. The Luminara paused, their glowing forms dimming slightly. "The bond must be reforged," the voice said. "Through music, through light, and through trust. But beware, for shadows have grown in the absence of the bond. They will seek to sever it forever." A chill ran through Elara at the words, but she nodded. "I will do whatever it takes," she said firmly. The pedestal's glow brightened, and the runes pulsed faster, as if responding to her resolve. The Luminara faded, their forms dissolving into the light. Only the hummingbird remained, its wings a blur of energy and purpose. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, Elara stood alone in the glade, the weight of a forgotten legacy pressing on her shoulders. The hummingbird landed lightly on her hand, its tiny body warm against her skin. "I'll protect the bond," she whispered to it. I promise." The bird chirped softly, as if in agreement, and took flight, leaving her with the faint melody of its wings. A song that now carried the weight of both hope and destiny. The days that followed felt like stepping into a dream, both wondrous and disquieting. Elara could no longer see the gardens as she once did. Every shadow seemed to hold secrets. Every rustling leaf whispered truths just out of reach. The hummingbird remained her constant companion, leading her back to the glade each evening where the pedestal awaited her. Its runes now shone with increasing brilliance, as if awakening alongside her newfound purpose. The Luminara's voice continued to guide her. Though they never fully appeared again, their presence was unmistakable, woven into the melodies that filled the air when she stood near the pedestal. The ancient bond they spoke of became clearer as they unveiled fragments of the past. Centuries ago, Elara learned her ancestors had discovered the Luminara's realm by accident. A shimmering world of light and harmony nestled beyond the veil of the mortal plane. This discovery was no mere chance, but a convergence of destiny and will. Her great forebears, moved by the Luminara's plight, had vowed to protect the balance between the two realms. In return, the Luminara offered their magic to nurture the kingdom's lands, ensuring prosperity and peace. Together, they forged a pact, a symphony of light and music that resonated in both worlds. But humans forget, the Luminara's voice murmured one evening, carried on a warm breeze. What was sacred becomes mundane, and what is eternal fades into stories. Elara's chest tightened at the weight of those words. "What caused the bond to weaken?" she asked, her voice echoing through the stillness. "Time," the voice replied simply. "Your ancestors neglected the ritual, and with it, the bond frayed. Without the connection, our light began to fade, and shadows grew in the spaces where light once reigned." "Shadows," Elara whispered, an involuntary shiver running down her spine. She thought of the creeping unease she'd felt in the palace of late, the flickers of darkness in the corners of rooms, the way the torches seemed to dim too quickly. It wasn't just her imagination. "They are the void left by broken promises," the Luminara said, their tone somber. "They feed on the absence of harmony, thriving when neglect and doubt linger." Elara swallowed hard, feeling the enormity of her task pressing upon her. "How can I repair what was broken so long ago?" "Through the same bond that created it. Music, light, and trust," the voice said. "You must awaken the ancient melody, the one your ancestors played to seal the pact. But you will not be alone." The words struck a chord deep within her, and she felt a strange sensation, a faint hum vibrating through her very soul. It was as if the melody was already inside her, waiting to be remembered. The next morning, Elara retrieved her harp, its polished wood gleaming under the light streaming through her chamber window. She had played since childhood, though never for more than idle pleasure. But as her fingers brushed the strings, she realized this was different. The notes that emerged seemed to carry a weight beyond the mortal world, a resonance that filled the room and lingered in the air. The hummingbird appeared then, perching on the window ledge, its tiny frame trembling as it listened. When she ventured back to the glade that evening, harp in hand, the pedestal seemed to come alive. Its runes pulsed faster, brighter, in sync with the thrumming melody the bird created with its wings. Tentatively, Elara plucked the strings, her melody blending with the bird's hum. The runes responded, glowing in patterns that shifted with the music. A ripple passed through the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The Luminara's voice returned, softer now, almost reverent. "You are awakening the bond," they said. "But beware, princess. The shadows have noticed your light." A chill swept through the glade. The once harmonious air felt heavier, colder. The trees around the clearing seemed to darken, their leaves trembling as though in warning. Elara's fingers faltered on the harp, but the hummingbird chirped sharply, its tone urgent. She steadied herself and continued to play, letting the music flow through her, pushing against the encroaching darkness. As the melody reached a crescendo, the air seemed to split, and for a moment, Elara glimpsed something beyond the glade. A realm of shimmering lights and flowing colours stretched infinitely, its beauty marred by tendrils of shadow creeping at its edges. The Luminara's world, she realized with a start. It was breathtaking, but it was dying. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving her breathless and shaken. The runes on the pedestal dimmed, their glow faint but steady. The hummingbird rested on her shoulder, its warmth grounding her. Elara set the harp down and exhaled shakily. "I'll save it," she whispered, though her voice was barely audible. "I'll save you." The bird chirped softly, its tiny head tilting as if in acknowledgement. But deep in the shadows of the trees, something moved, unseen but palpable. A darkness that was growing bolder, waiting for its moment to strike. Night fell heavily upon the palace as Princess Elara sat alone in her chamber, the harp resting across her lap. She couldn't shake the vision of the Luminara's world, its vibrant beauty threatened by creeping shadows. The glade, the pedestal, even the hummingbird had become the center of her existence, pulling her deeper into a mystery that felt as ancient as the stars. But with every step forward, the weight of the unknown bore down on her. The hummingbird, perched on the windowsill, let out a soft trill. Its eyes, so impossibly black and bright, held her gaze. Elara set the harp aside and approached the bird, as though it might somehow answer the questions swirling in her mind. "What happens if I fail?" she whispered. The bird tilted its head but offered no response. Instead, it took flight, darting into the night. Elara felt an ache of loss until she noticed it hovering just beyond the window, waiting for her. The message was clear. Grabbing her cloak and the harp, she followed. The gardens were a sea of shadows under the crescent moon. The air felt alive, charged with an electricity that raised the fine hairs on her arms. The hummingbird led her through familiar paths, but this time something was different. The hedges seemed taller, the trees darker, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blotted out the stars. When she reached the glade, her breath caught. The pedestal was glowing more brightly than ever, its runes casting intricate patterns of light that danced across the ground. But the air was thick with tension. The shadows at the edges of the clearing pulsed, growing and receding like a tide, their movements slow but purposeful. Elara. The Luminara's voice was a melody woven into the breeze, soft but urgent. Their faint forms began to coalesce, their light piercing through the dark like shards of a fractured sun. "I've been playing the melody," she said, her voice trembling. "I've tried to awaken the bond, but it doesn't feel like enough." "You are restoring the connection," the Luminara said, their tone a harmony of reassurance and caution. But the shadow feeds on doubt and neglect. It grows stronger as it senses the bond returning. To truly restore what was lost, you must understand the full weight of the alliance. Elara gripped the harp tightly. "Tell me, what does it mean to restore the bond?" The light of the Luminara dimmed slightly, as though they hesitated. "The bond is not only music, light, and trust. It is sacrifice. To maintain harmony, both our worlds must be willing to give of themselves. Your ancestors understood this. Their dedication to the pact allowed both realms to thrive." "What kind of sacrifice?" Elara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. The Luminara did not reply immediately. Instead, the pedestal began to hum, its runes shifting into new patterns. A faint light bloomed in the air above it, forming a vision of the past. Elara saw her ancestor, a queen with a regal bearing, her silver hair catching the sunlight as she played a golden harp at the pedestal. Around her, the Luminara danced in radiant harmony. The queen's melody was hauntingly beautiful, each note resonating with the pulse of the earth. But as the vision unfolded, Elara noticed something startling. The queen's light seemed to dim as the bond strengthened, her energy flowing into the Luminara's world. "She gave a piece of herself," Elara whispered, realization dawning. That's what sustained the bond. The Luminara's voice softened. "The bond requires reciprocity. When your ancestors gave their music, their light, their trust, we gave ours in return. But when humans abandoned the pact, we could no longer share in that harmony. Our realms began to wither." Elara's chest tightened. She had not expected her task to demand so much. But before she could speak, a sharp chill swept through the glade. The shadows surged, writhing like living creatures. The pedestal's glow faltered, and the Luminara's forms flickered. "They are here," the voice said, filled with dread. From the darkness, a figure emerged, tall and imposing, its form shifting like smoke, its presence suffocating. The shadow was no longer a vague threat. It had a will, a purpose, and it was drawn to the broken bond. The hummingbird let out a shrill cry and darted toward the figure, its wings glowing with a fierce light. The shadow recoiled, hissing like steam against fire. But it wasn't enough. The figure advanced, the darkness pooling around it like a tide. Elara stepped forward, her harp in hand. Her fingers trembled as they found the strings, but she forced herself to play. The melody rose into the air, weaving through the glade like a golden thread. The runes on the pedestal brightened, their light cutting through the darkness. The Luminara joined her, their voices merging with her harp's song in a chorus that filled the clearing. The shadow writhed, its form fracturing under the weight of the harmony. But even as it faltered, Elara felt its pull, a cold, insidious force that gnawed at her resolve. "Do not stop," the Luminara urged. "The light must not falter." Elara closed her eyes, pouring every ounce of her will into the music. She felt the bond stirring, ancient and fragile, but alive. The pedestal's glow surged, and for a moment she glimpsed the Luminara's world again, brighter, stronger, yet still teetering on the edge of ruin. As the final note of her song echoed into the night, the shadow dissolved, its hissing cries swallowed by silence. Elara collapsed to her knees, her breath ragged. The hummingbird landed on her shoulder, its tiny body warm and steady against her trembling form. "You are the bridge," the Luminara said softly. "But the bond is not yet whole. The final act remains." Elara looked up at the pedestal, its runes now glowing steadily, and nodded. She didn't yet know what the final act would demand of her, but she knew she would face it, whatever it took. The glade was silent, yet the air quivered with the tension of what was to come. Elara knelt before the pedestal, the harp resting at her side, her fingers still tingling from the melody she had woven to banish the shadow. The runes on the ancient stone pulsed gently now, their light a steady rhythm that mirrored her heartbeat. The hummingbird perched on her shoulder, its tiny claws pressing into her skin. A quiet, grounding presence amid the vast unknown. "You are close," the Luminara's voice whispered, its tone reverent yet heavy with expectation. Their faint, flickering forms encircled her, their light dim but steady. But the final act requires more than melody. It is the essence of the bond that must be restored. The bridge between our worlds must be reforged. Elara swallowed hard, her throat dry. "What do I need to do?" The pedestal's glow intensified, the runes rearranging themselves into a new pattern. A spiraling constellation of light that rose into the air above the stone. Within the spiral, she glimpsed scenes from her kingdom. Golden fields of wheat swaying under the sun, rivers sparkling like molten silver, and people laughing in vibrant, bustling marketplaces. But the images were fleeting, and darkness lingered at the edges of the vision, threatening to consume it all. The bond is life itself, the Luminara said, a harmony that flows through both our realms. But to restore it, you must give a piece of your own light. Elara's breath caught. She remembered the vision of her ancestor, the queen who had given part of herself to forge the original bond. She had seen the way the woman's radiance had dimmed, the sacrifice etched into every note she played. "What happens to me if I do this?" Elara asked, her voice quiet but firm. The Luminara hesitated, their forms dimming slightly. "The light you give will be drawn into the bond. It will sustain both realms. You will not lose yourself, but you will never be the same. The bond will mark you as it marked those before you." Elara looked down at her hands, pale in the pedestal's glow. She thought of the shadows she had seen creeping into her world, the darkness that had threatened to devour the Luminara's realm. This bond was not just an ancient promise, it was the foundation of balance and harmony. Without it, both worlds would fall. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Tell me what to do." The Luminara's light brightened, their forms solidifying for a brief moment. "Play," they said. "But this time, the melody must come from within, not from memory, but from the essence of who you are. Let your light guide your hands." Elara picked up the harp, its polished wood warm against her skin. She closed her eyes, letting the pedestal's glow seep through her, its rhythm intertwining with her own heartbeat. The hummingbird chirped softly, its wings brushing against her cheek like a whisper of encouragement. Her fingers found the strings, and the first notes rose into the air, soft, tentative, but growing stronger with each chord. The melody was unlike anything she had ever played, a song that seemed to emerge from the depths of her soul. It was a harmony of hope and sorrow, of love and loss, of strength and vulnerability. The air around her vibrated with its power. The pedestal responded, its runes flaring with light that shot upward, piercing the canopy of trees. The glade seemed to dissolve, and Elara found herself standing between two worlds. On one side was her kingdom, vibrant and alive. On the other, the Luminara's realm, shimmering with ethereal beauty, but marred by encroaching shadows. As she played, she felt a pull deep within her, a warmth radiating from her chest, spreading through her arms and into the harp. The light of the runes shifted, flowing toward her and back into the strings, creating a circuit that connected her to both worlds. The Luminara's voices rose in harmony with her melody, their light intensifying. Then came the pain. It was not sharp but deep, a tugging sensation, as though something essential was being drawn from her. She faltered, her fingers trembling on the strings, but the hummingbird chirped sharply, its wings thrumming with determination. "You are the bridge," the Luminara said. "Do not falter." Elara steadied herself, pouring everything she had into the melody. She thought of her people, of the laughter in the markets, of the golden fields. She thought of the Luminara's shimmering world, its beauty worth saving. The warmth within her grew, bright and consuming, until it felt as though she were made entirely of light. With a final resonant chord, the melody reached its peak. The pedestal flared with brilliant light, and Elara felt the circuit complete, the bond restored. The shadows that had lingered in the Luminara's realm dissolved, their tendrils retreating into nothingness. The air shimmered with a golden glow, and the glade returned, the pedestal now glowing faintly but steadily. Elara collapsed to her knees, the harp slipping from her hands. Her body felt heavier, her limbs weak, but the warmth of the bond lingered within her, a quiet but steady presence. The Luminara's forms solidified fully for the first time, their light radiant and whole. "You have restored what was broken," they said, their voices a chorus of gratitude. "Both our worlds will thrive again, thanks to your courage and sacrifice." The hummingbird landed on her shoulder, its tiny body glowing faintly. Elara smiled weakly, her vision blurring. She felt changed, lighter, yet more grounded, as though she now carried the weight of both worlds within her. As the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, the Luminara faded into the light, their voices lingering in the air like the final notes of a song. Elara sat alone in the glade, the pedestal standing as a silent testament to the bond she had renewed. Though she knew the Luminara's world was hidden once more, she felt their presence in every beam of sunlight and every whisper of the wind. The bond was whole, and both realms were safe.